right. Hello, guys. Welcome back to Unqualified, the podcast. And today we've got a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Isaiah. I'm a game writer. This is my first podcast. So
Yeah.
This is my first
We're so
time.
happy to have Isaiah here.
Yes.
So, like Isaiah said, he's a game writer. So, we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about writing today in all forms. Shia, our other co-host,
Yeah.
is a screenwriter, and then I've done some screenwriting. I've also done some like writing fiction and poetry, and then Day has done some. Day's gonna.
Dave, do you know how to
We
read?
all write.
Day is going to be talking about writing as well, and then we're also all going to be talking about some writing we did not like in movies and games and books, and then writing we loved.
Okay.
So.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Day has the exterior perspective. She can, as a non-writer, she can provide
Yeah.
her 2 cents about how she's consumed that.
You've done the thing before, though. I feel like in game.
Yeah, video games.
Please.
So why don't we go ahead and start with some things we love in writing? That way we can kind of, you know, let's think about that. Let's think about.
Yeah, I mean, as far as game writing, you said some of our favorite pieces. I think we talk about this. Japanese people, they know how to write a game.
They
you
really
know?
do.
I think
They
some of the
really do.
best narratives have been from like Japanese RPGs or JRPGs, which is a genre. And
They
that,
definitely do.
if you're familiar with like Final Fantasy, Tales franchise, Dragon Quest, those narratives I think do a great job of weaving gameplay into storytelling. So I think it's Japanese storytelling is one of my favorite things to glean.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I think that's very interesting, like game writing specifically, because you're having to like balance these things of like, okay, what's the gameplay and how does that intertwine with the actual narrative that you're trying to like tell. If you could talk about like how you balance that at all, because like I've never done game writing.
Yeah, same.
No, I mean, I talked a little bit
We
with
did.
Day's class, but I do think telling a story through video games is like the epitome of creative storytelling because you have so many modes in action, and you are telling a story visually and through gameplay and how you weave those together. I think it takes a really skilled individual to visually picture how those aspects of storytelling like connect a little bit, because you can of course still tell through I think screenwriting comes into play a little bit as well, because you have cutscenes and you have those things, and it's so many different. It's like taking all of the best of all worlds, right?
Yeah.
And you can have like databases in the game where you're just like, these are just facts about the world, exposition, and it's just like, it is world building, and that's what I think the biggest thing to remember is. It's just like you're building a whole world,
Right.
and that's kind of like, okay, that's different from a book where it takes place on like a timeline and you're choosing the best point on that timeline to tell the story. Oftentimes video games are just like worlds,
The
and it's
entirety
the
of the
whole
world, yeah.
It's a whole art.
yes,
Like-
it's a larger narrative with a more concise beginning, middle, and end, and typically, some of the not cliche and like hackneyed things, but like, the villain and usually the villain's demise, and though change is a big thing, and usually in storytelling something has to change. So I think there are a lot of things we take from literature and even just like writing short fiction that are applicable to video games too. So it's not like super different. Like I feel like as a screenwriter or poetry, like you can provide.
That's true. Bring your mic up.
Yeah, I was
Oh.
just about to say that. It
Oh,
keeps
sorry.
going in and out.
Could y'all not hear me the whole time?
No, we could, but it was going in and out. And I
Sorry.
think, Shia, also yours did that a little bit when you were talking as well too.
Could you hear
Um,
me?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because. Okay. That is really interesting because, I guess I haven't really thought about game writing as much until honestly, like talking to you and like coming to see my eye,
Yeah.
because it takes so much. Like, at least with it got really loud.
Yeah, turn it down a little bit.
You can okay.
All right, that's good.
Okay. So at least with like a novel, like you said, or just a book you're reading, like you can kind of develop the story and the arc a little bit. I don't know, like it's just different because
Mhm.
as a reader, like you're experiencing it, like you can. I don't know, like I don't know how to describe it, but in
Yeah.
the
I think
game,
I know what you
when
mean,
you're
yeah.
like
Yeah.
playing the game, like you really, really have to captivate whoever's playing it to be able
Mhm.
to be brought into the story.
Yes.
And like, although of course that's the same with any like form of writing,
Mm-hmm.
like I feel like it's even more so with games
Yeah.
because
Oh, for sure.
you have to get them to like keep playing and like
Mhm.
continue it.
Right.
And like reading, like usually I don't know.
No, that was-
Yeah, I get what you're saying though, because like I think in games the writing has to be like the least obvious. Like you really have to like when you're playing a game, you're not thinking about, oh my god, I wonder how the script of this was developed.
Mhm.
Like you need to be engrossed in the world and feel like you're going through the actions of that character. So the writing has to be so like seamless with the plot of the
Mhm.
game that it's like almost invisible. Like there's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
you feel like, oh, I'm writing the story as you're playing it. Like
Yeah,
Right.
that's
you've seen.
and it almost like it takes more to be that simple, you know,
Mhm.
for you to like it's harder for it to be as less noticeable.
Yeah.
Right.
Like it takes more. I
that
guess,
translation.
in the writing.
Yeah, I think because as a writer, you're also like the backbone of a team, and you're delivering like these libraries of exposition to another, like to members of that team. So you know your programmers, your animators, like they need to have concise information that allows them to tell the story you're trying to deliver, so it's all cohesive, and that's another challenge. But I agree. I think because I supplement my degree with English, and what I struggled with in my English classes was like all those details, all of those things that you have in books, you know, thought and tone, and those things aren't really relayed in writing in video games. They're not, because in video games, you know, we're taught, you know, gamers don't want to read long things of
Yeah.
text, so like
Mhm.
you're
True.
taught
Gamers
to
don't
do.
like to read. You heard it here first.
Yeah, correct. And so, yeah. So, you know, long paragraphs or exposition that has to be short and concise to gamers to, like, you know, not feel.
Which I think that also kind of translates to film a little bit because you don't want to be too on the nose and you don't want to like feed your audience like spoon to mouth, you know, like
Absolutely.
you want as much as possible. I think that's kind of a correlation between game writing and film is that you want to rely on the visuals as well because
Mhm.
it's a visual form of art. And so you want to have, you know, to be able to tell the story in a way that, you know, uses visuals with also like, of course, adding the story. But like,
Mhm.
I know for at least film, like when it comes to dialogue and stuff, like you'd rather show that this person has this characteristic rather than saying like, oh, I'm
Right.
like this, you
I mean,
know?
that's the
Mhm.
biggest rule in any form of writing that you ever do is show, don't tell.
Yes,
like
showing,
that's
not
the
telling, yeah.
number
Yeah.
one rule.
But
is-
I think even more so for like film and game because
Yeah.
in a book you almost have to because there are no
That's true,
visuals,
yeah.
That's
you
true.
know?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
you kind of have to add
be like,
the
"This is
extra
what's
details
happening."
and the
Exactly,
extra
yeah.
fluff because or
Mhm.
else you won't really know.
You get lost. In
But
it.
yeah.
But talking about like our favorite writing in video games, I don't know if any of y'all played The Stray that came out this
Yeah,
year.
Stray.
It was about like a cat in this like post-apocalyptic
Wait, I heard about
world.
that. I didn't play
Yeah.
that.
And it was so good. Like the ending broke my heart. I was straight up like boohoo crying over this
Mhm.
cat. It was so good, and it did such a good job of like building out that world because it is like this post-apocalyptic, like broken down, overrun by robots world. But you also have to. The main character is a cat, so you have to get emotionally tied to this character who can't talk. Like they
Right.
have no dialogue, but you like through the storytelling become emotionally connected to this
Mhm.
cat and these characters, and it was so good. Love that game. Highly
Yeah.
recommend it.
I want to play it. I heard the ending. I mean, I spoiled it for myself, but yeah,
Yeah.
I know what happens.
Boohoo crying.
Sounds good though.
Yeah, it was very
Yeah.
good.
So what are the characteristics? Oh gosh.
Yep.
What are the characteristics so far, like out of those games that you guys have liked the writing in? Like, what makes them likable?
Final Fantasy is just
Mhm.
such. It has such emotion. I
Mhm.
feel like it's the real thing. When I
Mhm.
was playing Final Fantasy X, there were moments where I was like,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I was literally so moved, and like the way the story develops. Like I don't think there's any story they have for like at the end you're left wanting almost, but in a good way. It's like my heart just broke, but I'm still content
Yeah.
with the fact that it broke.
Mhm,
Like you know
mhm.
they let characters die or the player doesn't always win, and this isn't to spoil it because Final Fantasy X has been out since like I've been born.
Mhm.
But like when Titus has to leave and go to the far plane and everything, it was just so moving. It was really moving, and they use so much different, like the songs are in Final Fantasy games are so good too. So it's like everything just moves with the story, and it's so nice. It's so refreshing. It's like a whole little book. But the book is so
well,
good.
yeah, that's why I think gaming is like the epitome of storytelling because there's music,
really
there's a whole. I mean, there's just so many different professions involved in making a good game.
Which
and
people don't think about. I know
Yeah.
I did not think about that
Yeah,
at
I was
all
like-
until coming to see
yeah.
that.
And I think
really cool.
weaving into that storytelling, Final Fantasy does execute well. I'm playing the most controversial of the series right now, number 13.
I knew you were gonna say number 13.
Really?
I don't mind number 13.
I love 13,
I do too.
which is probably not a popular
Big
opinion. Yeah, I think it's just beautiful.
I enjoy the story.
Yeah.
I do too, and I'm like, it's a little bit different. I think it's because it's not the JRPG and everything else. It's a little bit different, but I'm like, it's still good. The story is really good too.
Yeah, I think
I really enjoyed the
they
story.
do a lot of, and like in books, you have like craft decisions. The same thing for video games. There are decisions you take to like tell a story well. In that game, like the first half of the game, you're playing as a cast of characters who are kind of restricted in their role, and they have like one goal, and everything's kind of like playing for them, and they have to meet that ultimatum. It's sort of the plot, what pushes the characters to do the thing before another thing happens, and that's sort of reinforced by what they're playing through. Like the player goes to like these restricted, like it's very linear, and
you don't have a lot of choices.
yes, it's one way, and it's just the constant. Like for I would say like 30 hours of the game, it's just like you're moving in one direction, and then when this big thing happens in the climax, they go down to this world, and it's just open world.
Right.
And
Oh, wow.
it's
so
symbolic and
good.
thematic with like freedom and like those decisions that I don't know who directed that game.
I don't know either.
But
But I feel like maybe that's the difference then, because usually, Final Fantasy games are linear until you do reach a certain point where it is like an open world and everything, especially for like 10 and 13. The first like 50 hours of 10 is just a linear game. And then it's like, okay, well, now that we know how this is going, go ahead and go to all these different worlds you wanted to go to beforehand. Like, you don't have to leave. So I really like that about Final Fantasy games. I think Japanese like writing period is really, really
very good.
They focus on the story a lot. You can tell it takes time, if that makes sense.
I think
Very
that's
much
something
so.
that definitely sets apart like certain games versus others. Like, because there's some games that I've played where like they've been kind of addicting, but for like a short amount of time, because like you could tell there was no background to the characters of the world. Like it was just like this random person, like nondescript.
And I guess like not all games
not
need
have-
that.
Which is true.
Yeah.
But
But
like,
when it's supposed to be there, I think you can tell.
Oh,
when
for
there's a
and I
sure.
think
gap.
even like having a little something, like making the character just a little more than just one dimensional, helps you to like be more drawn in to the story in the world. But I guess it depends on what kind of games you're into and like what kind of person you are. But like for me, I like games to where like I feel like I'm transported into this world and it's like an escape. And so that comes across more when the story is more like
Literally. I mean, even in games that seem simple, like one of my favorite games is Stardew Valley. It seems like a very simple farming simulator where you go, you live in this town and you're farming, but like the more you get into the game, the more like you unlock about this town and about this world.
See,
and
I
about
love
the
that.
characters
I love
around
that.
you, and it's
so
so
nice.
and it keeps you engrossed because you're like, I want to know more. I want to unlock this part of the world. I want to unlock this part of the world, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think like games have a very unique ability to like transport you into a world like no other media does.
I think it's very underrated. I think one of the things I say is like there's power in lore. Like a game that delivers very little and sort of just like feeds you tiny bits and pieces, and it makes you crave more information about what's happening, even though it may not relate to like the plot, but like you would want to know like those things. And I think when you deliver it and sort of keep the player addicted is what I call it.
Like going along with lore, like one of the biggest like I think pieces of lore that has come out in video games recently is Five Nights at Freddy's. I don't really think gameplay itself has to, I mean, it's a regular horror game, you know, there's jump scares and everything, but the lore that has come out of, I don't even think the video game designer at the first one knew that this was going to turn into this, because I mean, like, there is like a bunch of lore around the game, and people, it's still trending on TikTok. People are still like, do you remember this? I'm like, oh my gosh. I remember when the first Five Nights at Freddy's came out, and I was like, okay, this is a nice game. I never expected it for it to become this big popular thing, like never. But the lore has so many people like, oh, you know, these kids died and now they're stuck in animatronics. Like it has people like that. That's a literal
Right,
thing. That's what it is.
I mean, it just shows that like taking the time, whether it's like just a simple detail or whatever, to like fully make your world and your game and your characters a little more captivating, like in your writing, like can do so much more if you want your game to be a little more impactful and like last longer than just like one quick play and you know, it's whatever.
For sure.
I agree.
So what are some game writing that we did not like?
Ooh.
I mean, I really think it just depends. I think game writing can lack in some aspects, but I think it's because of like time constraints. Again, like you were saying, it's lore, there's world building. Some of the best video game writing comes from games that are supposed to last like thousands of hours, if that makes sense. Because there's not a set time for you to be like, you know, I don't have to go to this mountain, which means I don't have to do this quest. That means I don't have to do this final boss battle, you know, with this great thing. When it is like a linear thing and, you know, you can really only spend like 10 hours playing it, it is kind of like, you know, but I feel like those are the games that are like franchises as well. Like I think Resident Evil, they don't have bad writing, but the story sometimes is like, you know, 3 hours or 4 hours of gameplay and everything. But it's like a bunch of different Resident Evils that go along with that whole story and plot and everything. So I think it really just depends. When games are like super small and there's like, you know, there's absolutely going to be like no sequel, prequel, nothing. It's kind of a little bit disappointing, if that makes sense.
I think that's the biggest thing that comes to mind when I think about like bad game writing. It's like not even bad. It's just like there isn't like there's
not noticeable writing.
Like I think of like games that like people were addicted to for a short amount of time, but then like no one ever plays again. Like games like Among Us. Like I remember the Among Us craze through the roof. I can't tell you a single thing like about the plots of Among Us. It was just like a fun game to play at the moment, and then
that's
and then move on.
That's the plot.
And that's another thing with games. Like not all games need like a very in-depth plot or thing. What we call thing one and thing two in literature or writing. Like thing one is the thing that you're turning the pages in a book for, and thing two is like everything else happening. And like games like Among Us, like the gameplay loop is made to be addictive and just like enjoyable. And that's another thing we talk about.
Play with friends and all that.
Yes, and it's being. I forget we call it not playability, but like reaching demographics who just want to play a game for an hour and not have to be invested in something.
Which makes sense.
There's power in that as well. So
it is true.
I don't know. Bad writing.
Yeah, it's hard because
it's a little less noticeable with games. I feel like it's hard
if you get too into it.
Because you can be, you know, distracted with all the eye candy and all the
exactly.
pretty visuals, and it's just like
I'm trying to think of like
he does
maybe
a
like
cartwheel.
those like corny dating simulators.
Oh.
Well, okay.
Actually, let's get into that.
That's
because
good.
I forgot I was gonna mention that. But they also know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing.
Because, like you said, like it is playable, like addicting, and like it's kind of mindless sometimes.
One thing comes to mind, especially now that you bring it up. Episode.
Oh my god.
Now this is the thing.
Okay, hold on. It's episode of video game is what we have to do. Or is it an interactive story? Because I think it depends.
That is true.
There's
also,
really
they have
gameplay.
Episode has become more like Wattpad. Like anybody can write on that, so that doesn't mean that everybody's a writer.
Exactly. Just random people in their backyard.
You're right. I won't mention it.
I think dating simulators. You know, there's all those like mobile phone game simulators. It's like, you know, you got 5 boyfriends. Just you like the best. It's not your romantic adventure. You know, I mean. They get the job done, though. You look at how many people downloaded those games. They obviously are getting
accomplish what they're looking for.
Which I feel like writing is still like a form of art in a way. So like it is going to be subjective.
Oh, for sure.
And so some writing can be very simple, and like to us it may be like really bad and corny, But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's bad writing, you know?
That's
I
true.
mean, because it's still effective. Like, we still played it
Yeah.
for hours.
It's
So-
definitely corny, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it did what it needed to do.
Definitely.
So, all right.
Yeah. Subjectivity.
Do we have anything else we'd like to talk about with game writing? Especially with our official game writer right here.
I
You know,
Any like
I don't know.
dreams, like dream games you'd love to like write or
Oh,
create or
anything Square
Yes.
Enix, honestly.
Honestly,
Like, that would
dream
be.
job.
Yeah.
Hire me and Isaiah. You have no
Yes.
reason not to. We both know
Jay
Japanese.
is fluent in Japanese.
Ooh. We'll do whatever you need us to do.
Yeah.
Honestly. I've always, and this is probably so crazy to say out loud, but Nintendo as well. I would like to work for them just because Mario is so huge.
Mm-hmm.
They also did really good world building with Mario.
I think that is like an important thing to think about because when it comes to game writing, like at first I was thinking, okay, what games had like dialogue or like things like that? But that's not even what it is. It's about the world
It's
building.
world building.
And so
yeah.
it's like which games had like really great world building and stuff and not. So.
The fact that Mario has gone on for this long and there's somehow always a new plot. Princess
Yeah.
Peach is still getting taken by Bowser, but
I am not a fan of Nintendo.
Oh.
As a company.
Oh,
as a
as a company.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I love Nintendo all day.
yeah.
Their
Yeah.
products, but that's one of the things we dissected in game ministries
You
back
have to
when
be
Kemp was
really-
teaching it. Yeah,
you
we
have
talked
to be real
about.
careful.
Well, I hear even working for them now is very like I've heard some things that were not good.
Yeah.
But as a company, they're very greedy in my opinion. And their company philosophy, like corporate wise, is literally lateral thinking with withered technology. And that literally means, let's give fans not what they deserve, but what they've been paying for. And you see that a lot with like recent releases like Scarlet and Violet Pokemon. Like those games, all those issues, like that philosophy is coming back to bite them in the ass a little bit. But they're just incredibly greedy. They started out as a toy company. in
They
Japan.
did.
Yeah.
They did. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they're a business forefront,
Probably.
that's,
Yeah.
first.
Well, Nintendo, get better, have better business ethics, and
Treat
then
us better.
hire them to and pay them
Yeah.
lots of money.
Yes.
Because the world building is
Hire them
is
too.
fun.
Yes.
It's definitely like something you can like recognize easily
Pokemon.
and like
Oh, for
Be
sure. They
capturing
have a
it, too.
very good brand. Like I can tell a Nintendo game like for anything. I'm like, oh yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
Nintendo made that game.
Pika.
Mhm. Indeed, yeah. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, so now we're gonna move into some film and TV writing.
Ooh.
We've got
Oh,
Shia,
no.
who's a screenwriter here.
You saying that is so weird too, because I'm like, I'm literally no one.
You're a screenwriter. I've written a few scripts as well, but I have found that I do not like screenwriting that much. I like writing like fiction and poetry and things more.
Mm.
So because yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about some screenwriting. What are some things you like about screenwriting? What are some genres? Whatever.
Screenwriting is interesting because unlike like game writing and like novel writing, you have to be very unspecific a lot of the time because you have your director and your DP and all that who are gonna add in their sense about how it should look like. So if you are super specific about this scene should look like this and this and this and that, director's gonna be like, no, the fuck is not, and be like, and move on. So like screenwriting is like kind of giving them the building blocks to go off of, being like, okay, this is in general how I want the scene to progress and how I want the story to progress and how I want these characters to feel, and then leaving that and being able to trust your team and to give them that interpretation and like let them go with that. I think is a very interesting journey, especially for someone like me who's like a big control freak. Like being able to just like give up on my scripts and be like, okay, you can do it, you can do it. It's super interesting.
That's why so many people like direct and write at the same time.
very
And I
much so.
think that's one thing that I love so much about like fiction, like writing novels and things, is like you have like complete creative control over the world, the
Right.
characters, everything.
Yep.
And like it's
I
just
don't
it's
know.
different. But
Screenwriting is hard.
screenwriting is fun though, because even though you do kind of have to let it go a lot of times, like you get to see them build so much upon that. Like you can literally start with just like interior, living room, like whatever, and then like you have a huge team of people who are bringing this to life in like such intricate like detailed ways, from like the set design to the lighting and everything. And so it's just really cool.
I think that's one of the things I love about it so much is being able to see how people take your words and make it what it means to them. Like, I think everyone's so smart, and I love having people like put their ideas into like what is like essentially your baby, and kind of raising it and see what it turns out to be. I think is really special. Like seeing what you thought it was going to be originally, and then what it turns out to be like after it's gone through everything is it's a really cool journey.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love screenwriting a lot.
I think one thing that people probably don't notice, like people who aren't into film and things or don't know about screenwriting, it can be kind of quick and easy to judge movies and TVs that have bad writing. But if you sit down and try to write a film or an episode, it is so difficult
It's tough.
because you literally like you're building a world, of course, but then you're also like doing the things of like a novel where you're like having a progression of the story and the arc and everything, and then you have to think like, I don't know, just practically in a way, because it obviously people are gonna have to bring this to life visually, and then to keep it like captivating is just, I don't know, it's so hard.
It's hard, yeah.
And I hate writing dialogue, and I know there's a lot of like silent films, of course. There's a lot you can do without saying anything. But for a lot of films, like there is a lot of dialogue, and I hate writing dialogue.
Really?
And that was something that stumped me up a lot.
I think you have to, for any type of writing, but especially screenwriting, you have to have like a strong mind's eye. Like you have to be able to visualize what these characters sound like, what the scene looks like. Like you have to really make them real in your head in order for it to come off as authentic when you write. So if you struggle with like kind of like a lot of times when I get like writer's block or whatever and I can't think of like how to progress a story, I'll like draw it. I'll draw it out the scene, and so like I can visualize like what I want to happen and how I want things to move forward. Like visualization is so important when it comes to writing.
That is good.
Tips for you writers out there.
I think like that just shows how like I think why I stopped liking screenwriting, and I realized like it's not really my strong suit in writing, because I always was someone who like wrote too much of the fluff and the details. Like I love the details, like the small details in writing, and you can't do that in film.
Oh, that's very much book writing.
That's what like the visual part is for. That's what the technical part is for, not the writing.
That's
and
true.
so I was like, dang, that's what I love to do in writing, and you can't do that.
Wow.
And so it definitely does take someone who is able to like think practically while also still having the creative side of writing, I guess.
But what's some of our like favorite instances of like film or TV writing?
There's probably so many examples, right?
There's so many. I'm trying to think.
Something I wish I wrote was Manchester by the Sea. If you guys have not seen it, it is literally the most
That's the one with,
heartbreaking film I've ever seen in my
Ben
life.
Affleck, right? Or
His
Casey.
brother,
Oh, yeah,
Casey Affleck.
Casey.
It is so sad, but it's such like a real, like authentic story. Like I wish I wrote that.
A big like inspiration for me in my writing, and maybe this is like I'm about to shoot myself in the foot. But Amy Sherman Palladino, she wrote Gilmore Girls and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And she is so good at dialogue with like quick, witty, and like just
She is.
big blocks of dialogue. It's so impressive, and to see like these actors get through it, and like she's so incredibly smart, and I love her comedic writing so much, and most of my writing is comedy centered, so like she's a big inspiration for me. Amy, come on the show.
See, and writing comedy is hard.
It's hard.
It is so hard. Like you can be funny in real life, and it cannot translate in.
Dang.
Yeah,
it's
I think a
definitely.
show, and it's gonna sound so stupid, a show that has really good comedic timing, and maybe it's just because of the actors too, but Wizards of Waverly Place, like Alex, she used to be on it. Selena Gomez, I don't know if it's just her.
Yeah.
She used to be on it. She used to be saying that quick witty stuff. I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
you do.
this
I mean,
is
you do have to
stupid.
deliver those lines like
You
a certain
do.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think they're also easy to deliver at the same time. Like you see some shows and they're like, why did they do this to like the actors? You made this hard to do
The
on
writing,
purpose.
yeah.
I feel like one of the like good instances of this is like Riverdale. I don't think any of the actors in there are bad, but sometimes
the writing
lines
makes it
are
difficult.
like.
I would talk
Oh
about
my gosh,
Riverdale.
what did he say? Yeah, if we want to talk about the
Well, that
writing
happened
we
with
did
the
not like.
CW and everything. We had that conversation with the CW.
But I like the flash writing. I like the flash.
I like the flash writing.
And
up to a certain
it's
point.
hard to say for like when it comes to TV, because there's usually a lot of different writers for certain
Right,
episodes
that's
and
true.
things, and
That's
so
true.
it's like a team. But that one freaking line in Riverdale when he's like talking about football, or you know what I'm talking about?
We all know.
He's
Yeah.
like the highs and lows.
High
of-
school
Epic
football.
highs and lows of high school football.
Like
I
what?
don't know what that. I don't know what Riverdale is supposed to be.
I think,
really don't.
and especially like I just took a class about writing for the series, and like you can very much tell when the writers have a plan for the season or like the series, like they know how each episode is gonna go. They have like a direction that they're going, and you can tell when they're just like episode after episode.
Just doing what
Making
they
it
want.
up.
Make it happen.
And
Make it
Riverdale
happen.
writers, I swear to God, they come in every week and like draw some words out of a hat and be like, okay, this is what we're gonna write this week, guys.
Didn't
Vampires,
it turn into like
power.
a apocalypse thing?
Literally, I
Did
watched
it?
the finale.
Witches.
Yeah, there's like superpowers, aliens, like
Zombies, right?
some. I don't know.
Is there, I
It's a
don't know
lot
why I
of-
thought I heard there were
A
zombies.
lot of
But
nonsense.
It probably is.
Okay,
It
when
probably
it
is.
when we think about this though, like, does it kind of relate to what Isaiah was saying earlier with like the not the playability because it's a show, but
Right.
like
Catering to an audience. and
we
everything.
are still talking about Riverdale after all these years.
That's
So
true.
obviously they're doing something right.
Well,
Granted,
I don't
I'm not
know.
watching. Okay, this is the thing. I'm not saying they're doing it right, and then that like the writing and the plot is like flowing well, like it should. But they know how to
impact, I guess.
impact an audience in a way that is keeping people interested in at least some aspect. Whether you're interested in it as in like, oh, the show is good, or I know a lot of people that watch it because it's so bad.
Literally,
Mhm.
And
yeah.
so like
And that's what I was gonna say.
there's
is
at
it-
least some element to it.
Is
you
it
know?
good to be bad? Is the question though.
And
If
some
we-
and sometimes it is.
I mean,
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. Reality TV.
well,
I mean,
Oh,
that's
true.
not.
But I think even
Some of
in
that is
reality
scripted.
TV
Some of it
like-
is scripted.
Okay, I was gonna
Some
say-
of it is
A
scripted.
little scripted.
I mean, but I feel like also with Riverdale, it's like you look at the cast too. Like people fell in love with the cast, which is like another thing. Like with writing, is so important. Like you grab lovable people and give them lines, but still, like I said, there's some lines in Riverdale that are so stiff.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but I think
like, why did you
I do
want
want to talk about the
this?
actors though, because for screenwriters, like a lot of the times you don't have any say in that, and so
Right.
you can write characters who are three-dimensional and wonderful, but then the actors might not portray that, or like
Yeah, and that's one of the struggles with screenwriting is you don't have a lot of control over the process of the film actually getting made. So you can hope and pray that you portray the characters good enough to like the casting directors and all that understand the essence of the character and like can cast appropriately. But if also it like speaks to your skills of a writer. Like if you're not giving your characters enough depth and
To
enough
work with,
like to work
yeah.
with, then like you're gonna have to go off of like surface level stuff.
that
Like,
is true.
Mm.
Yeah.
so it's really about you making sure that you portray as much as you can about these characters that you think is important and necessary to be in the story, and then letting it go from there. But yeah, the characters of Riverdale, I don't know. I think in Riverdale's an adaptation, which I think gets into an interesting thing too, of when you're taking characters who are already established
From
and
the
like
comics.
That
from
is
the comics
true.
and like
Mm.
twisting them to like fit your
Show
narrative
and
Yeah.
everything.
is interesting because I read the original Riverdale comics and
completely different.
very different. Like,
Right.
Completely
like they just
different.
took the names and like
Honestly,
put it.
honestly,
Like-
that's it. That's it.
I mean, I guess the thing is that when it comes to screenwriting, like you can have what you want in mind, but at the end of the day, like there's so many other factors in it that like it's kind of hard
It's hard.
because if you're not directing it and producing it, like you're kind of out of creative control.
Yeah.
You know? And so, and a lot of it is like to make money and different things. So it's kind of hard. I don't know.
Jordan Peele.
Right.
Very good example. Why you
He'll
write?
his
He wrote Get Out.
He wrote
Yeah.
Get Out, yeah.
Well,
That's
I don't
why,
know about the
I mean,
other
that's
ones,
why you
but
find
Get
a lot
Out.
of people who write and direct.
Yeah.
Like,
Which I think should be the norm. I feel like
Honestly,
because there's like
yeah.
an element of cohesion there, like you were saying, like having as a screenwriter, like some things are not going to happen. Like you have to be
Right.
flexible going in. That some things might not be like delivered. But I feel like if you're writing and producing or directing like a film or something, like that's cohesive in of itself
Right.
because you
you have
carry
more
that
say
vision.
over it.
I think
Yeah.
at the very least, you have to have a good relationship with your director.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's communication going back and forth about, like, your guys' vision, and hopefully because I know there's plenty of movies where it's like, this director left this project because of creative differences, and
Yeah.
like, that happens all the time.
Honestly.
So, like, having a good relationship with those people on set, so you can be like, actually, Don't do that. Do not do that.
I have to ask you, and
Yeah.
this is probably the most deadest question in cinema history, but like the whole Marvel and how they handled their writing, and people all of a sudden been on Marvel's booty, talking about you destroyed cinema, you destroyed cinema. Nobody's
I
going
hate
to
when
see.
people. I hate when people say that.
No one's going to see the mid movies anymore. They used to go straight to DVD. What's
Right.
going on? I mean, I feel like that's a bunch of different reasons why, streaming services have also killed what cinema used to
Right.
be.
Mhm.
But
I think
like
putting
putting
it
the blame
completely
on
on
it Marvel
Marvel
is kind of crazy.
is ridiculous. Like, obviously, cinema's not the same as it was 10 years ago. That's because things change and media's change, and like, it's not going to be the same in 10 years from now. Like, things are constantly evolving, and to like say that it's Marvel's fault is weird, because I think Marvel's one of the main things that keeps people in the theaters at this point. Like,
Honestly,
and whether you like that or not, it's the reality. Like, movie tickets are like $15-$20 nowadays. Like, you can't be spending
That's
that much to
true.
go see
a movie you don't think is going to be
right,
good,
like, a movie that
especially
you don't like really care
Yeah.
about, and especially it's gonna be on streaming like a couple
3
weeks later.
weeks after
But
the
I do
movie.
think it is interesting though, because I feel like we're having like less and less of like blockbuster, like big, high grossing movies. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that we're not having those like huge.
It really is just
It's a lot
Marvel
more
at this
of-
point.
Well, that yeah, but then the rest are a lot of like indie and like
That's
things
true.
that are,
There's not a lot of in between anymore.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I get that. I think COVID had a lot to do with that as well.
Probably.
Because a lot of like studios changed their release strategies. They're like, okay, we'll throw it in theaters for 3 weeks and then just put it on a streaming platform.
Straight to Disney
Like,
Plus.
I know what's coming out, Glass Onion, the like Knives Out sequel, was in theaters for like 2 weeks, but it's gonna be on Netflix in like 2
Yeah.
weeks from now. So
I
I'm
didn't
like,
even
I'll
know
just
that it
watch
was going to
when
be in theaters. I was like, oh, Netflix, I'll wait till it comes out.
Yeah, literally.
Like,
Wow.
Yeah, and I think studios like changing that strategy hit the box office hard. Like, people are
It just
turning on to
it does kind of suck though, because like there's nothing like watching a movie like
There's
in the
nothing
theaters.
like it.
It was
Nothing.
built to be seen.
You're basically
Like
paying
that.
for that experience now,
Yeah.
just like sitting,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
So yeah, screenwriting is fun but difficult, as we kind of talked about. And so our last like genre we're gonna go into
Someone
is
hire me. Sorry.
Hold on. Did you
Hire
like
me.
the movie and the writing in the new Black Panther movie? What did you think about the
Ooh.
dialogue and the writing?
That's a good question. The
Close your ears.
Don't
Actually,
spoil it.
never
I
mind.
haven't seen
Actually,
it.
never mind. Actually,
I haven't
never
seen
mind.
it
I'll
either,
I'll
but-
say this. No spoilers. The writing in the places where it's strong is super strong. It's brilliant writing. Like, it's very
Awesome.
good. But the writing where it's like you can tell it was for Marvel's world building and all that stuff. I won't get into specifics of what that is, but
Yeah.
it's like
Or two.
not
haven't
attached
watched
to
it.
the main
Mhm.
story.
Right.
I think could have been cut completely. Like, I didn't think that needed to be there.
I
at
think
all.
that
I
happens
feel
with
like-
Marvel movies,
Yeah.
though.
I was gonna
Mhm.
say that happens a lot
Shows.
with Marvel movies, and
Right.
I think it also happens a lot with just like franchises in general.
You have
Because
to.
Whoever's writing that like singular film, like, of course they want to be true to that story, but they have to still be connected to
think
the other
about
ones that are coming. So
Mhm.
you're gonna
That's what's
limit it a
coming,
little
Yeah,
bit.
and that's
Mhm.
tough with Marvel, is that it's hard to tell a contained story of like this one thing that happens. And I think Black Panther tried to do that, and they did for the most part.
Yeah.
But of course, being a part of this larger universe, like, oh, how is this gonna tie into the next movie and the ones that
Which is
Right.
which I think is a weak point of Marvel's writing, is their need to have everything connect, and I think that's what fans expect of them at this
Right.
point. But I don't think it's necessary, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
So I want to kind of segue into writing like for books and things, because of course that was like our earliest form of writing, and
Yeah.
it kind of birthed these other writing forms. And I kind of want to segue into that through talking about genres and like when it comes to games and when it comes to films and then for novels. Like, what do you guys think is the hardest genre to write for, and what genre do you guys like writing for the most?
I would say fantasy. Because
Fantasy.
Yeah.
fantasy goes along with that whole world. I mean, think of any fantasy book there's world building. Regardless, it might start off with like the Paragons and the Buddha Dukes and this will fighting, and you're like, what is this?
What is
sentence?
happening?
going
Like,
on?
they do start the books off without explaining much, but as you keep going and going and going,
Mhm.
it's world building. It really is. Usually in romance books, they in New York, Go to that cafe
That is
shop.
the thing. That's what's most
nice
fun,
and
I think,
sweet.
about writing other genres, like when it comes to novels and stuff. Like, I love writing stories where I get to build the world, especially if
Yeah.
it's things that, like, aren't real, because when it comes to those, like, New York or whatever, like, you gotta know, like, street names, you gotta know all this historical things. And some people like doing the research
Yeah.
for that, but I don't sometimes. So it's really fun to get to, like, create the
Yeah,
world
that's
from the
just use
ground
your
up.
imagination.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the exact opposite of that.
Really?
I like to work in reality when I write. I like to
Mm.
have something to go off of. Having to like, I think fantasy is so difficult to write for it.
It definitely
It is
so-
hard. It is very
I'm
hard.
so impressed by people who can do it well because I'm like, you are essentially playing God. Like you're
Mhm.
in this
You have
world
to create
from
everything.
Mhm.
scratch and like everything about it. I think that it's a lot of work and it's fun, but I don't know if it's my strong suit necessarily. I prefer to go on Google. What is this called?
What are these
New York
streets?
street names.
Literally.
Well, I think it all adheres to like that one rule in writing is write what you know.
Mhm.
And I think when you're using your imagination so much in like fantasy or any fantastical mythical thing, like you're pulling things out of your head, and that is definitely just like pure
different.
imagination.
Then when you get to plot holes, being like, wait, did I have it like, so,
Like,
Yeah.
does this make
does
sense in the
this make-
universe?
Right. It's
Was
Like-
his birthday on the 13th?
But
or
you
the
have so much
14th?
liberty. Like sometimes
that's the
I've
cool
found
thing about
myself
it.
like creating random facts about
But
the
you
universe
could.
because like
Because you can.
that
can.
would
There's
fix
no,
the
like-
plot hole or something. You know.
There's like no rules to it, which is why it's so like free.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people love fantasy so much.
They
For
do.
sure.
Yeah.
I've kind of gotten to marry those two things in my most recent project. This is a secret because maybe it'll get produced. I don't know.
Ooh.
But like it takes place in both like the real world, but there's also a lot of fantastical elements that are like not. So being able to marry those two things has been really fun for me. Because I get to be creative, but I also like get to have some limitations. I love a good limitation. Give me some.
Good,
Give me
yeah.
some.
I do
Mhm.
like that. That
real
is
risk.
cool.
Yeah.
Which the cool thing about that, like which we've kind of seen in like a lot of superhero things, where it's like a mix of the both.
Mhm.
Like there's relatable aspects, like they go to school, like Spider-Man goes to school,
Yeah.
he's in New
Mhm.
York, but then there's also that like, like what if the world was like this, you know? So it's kind of cool.
Get to
Yeah.
dream about
But
it.
I love reading a good fantasy story. Like one of my favorite book series, Percy Jackson.
Got
The
to.
show's got-
Of course.
I was obsessed with Percy Jackson. Like,
Right.
that story had me by the throat in middle school.
Yeah.
By the throat.
Honestly.
And
Same.
it did that same thing where it's like he's in New York, like it's a real place, but we're also dealing with Greek mythology
Olympus.
and like
Yeah.
having these weird, crazy, fantastical elements, but like he's a regular middle schooler. So
Out
like,
here
Yeah.
fighting
Yeah.
gods.
Yeah,
it's so
That's
great.
a life.
that is
yeah.
cool.
Right.
I think, like I said, like my strong point in writing is a lot of the like fluff and the extra details.
Mhm.
So I eventually want to be able to write more fantasy. Fantasy is really hard right now, like you said. Like I've kind of been struggling with that. But I think the thing that I find I like the most about writing is being able to express yourself, and whether that's in game writing or screenwriting or in novels, and getting to like share experiences that you've had, even if you're like tailoring them to like the character in a way, you know. And so I'll take like emotions that I have trouble like dealing with, and I'll like incorporate it into my writing somehow, and it's like such a like relief. And
Mm.
so I found that that's something that I love the most about writing, especially like in fiction. You kind of get to do that a lot. And then also with screenwriting, like if I'm writing a character, I'll like kind of hide some like details in her that's like that's literally me, but like no one will know that, you know.
Yeah. I mean, write what you know.
Yeah. What genre do you tend to like write in the most though? Like when you do write?
I'd say fiction, just like regular fiction. I don't know about genre, like as in romance or whatever. Like it's literally just like fiction in general, because
I thought you were gonna say romance.
no, okay.
Let me read.
I love
Right.
reading romance, but not writing it because
Wow.
it's
It's
kind
so
of
very
awkward.
I love writing a
It's
steamy,
so
sexy.
awkward, right? And like, I like to pull from what I know, and from most of what I
I know a
know
lot.
is writing.
Stop.
Is writing.
Stop.
It's writing about young women
Mm.
who are just going through it,
Yeah.
like are
Alright,
making
let's
their
talk about
way,
it.
you know. And so a lot of that is like I said, I'll talk about like emotions that I've had, and I feel like I just like feel a lot of things like really deeply, and so I like I'll just write about that. I'll like write about the way that like certain things make me feel, and then like kind of incorporate that into a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I don't.
Writing-
And then poetry is fun too.
Oh,
Yeah.
poetry's a completely different beast.
I
Like,
love it.
I don't understand how your brain works.
It just the thing about poetry is like you're allowed to be like pretentious and like all
Storm outside, clouded my
yeah.
Poetic.
I love
That's
it
the
because
point.
like, my thoughts are like poetic sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I see certain things, and so like you're allowed to do that because sometimes when you're writing like you know novels, books, whatever. Like when you get too poetic, it like
Sounds arrogant
It's too-
or like
it
You're
sounds
doing too
arrogant,
much.
or like your audience can get kind of lost in that, like it gets
Mm.
kind of muddy. But when you're
Mhm.
doing poetry, like they know, you know what you're getting, like you know you're getting that like poetic, like
Right.
you know.
Vibe.
And so I love it. I just love writing poetry.
What they do, they snap.
Yeah.
Poetry
Yeah.
people, they snap.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, they snap, they snap. That's
They
the
snap.
clapping, yeah.
So I guess do we want to end it off with our like favorite, some of our favorite pieces of writing, whether that is in film,
Yeah, for-
game, books, music, whatever. And
You
let's
start.
just kind
I
of
gotta
okay.
Yeah.
I was about to say, yeah, I gotta think a little bit.
This Is Us, the show.
Mm.
The writing in that, it feels so authentic, like almost more than like anything else I've ever watched. So I love that. I love the writing for that. Books. This year I read this book called The Electric Kingdom, and it was this like dystopian like apocalypse book, but like it was very unique because I know we kind of got tired of the whole dystopian like after middle
Yeah.
school, you know.
Yeah.
But,
It ran its course,
It took
definitely did.
it kind of combined like time travel and stuff plus the apocalyptic thing, and
Okay.
the writing was just very like I just felt really really attached to the characters and like I was in the world, so I loved that. And then writing, I love for songwriting. I also love songwriting, and I'd say Taylor Swift. I love Taylor Swift.
I mean, she is
Um,
very talented
She is.
in
And
writing her work.
Also, Lizzie McAlpine. If you guys haven't heard of her, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm wearing a Lizzie McAlpine shirt today. My bad. Both of them just like I feel like write about their like experiences and just like share it, and so that's something I love to do. So
Okay.
yeah.
Snaps.
Oh, yeah.
Isaiah?
You know, I think I talked about the book I was reading this year, The Alchemist.
I still need to read that.
Yeah, that's a
Oh.
great book. That one, I mean, I still need to finish it. It's just I've been doing everything else, but
Right.
it's just a great story about like the universe is on your side and everything you want, the universe forces that, and like your future is already written. Like there's this Arabic saying muktab, which means it is already written. It's just about they call it your personal legend. It's just all about following your personal legend. It's just very inspiring. So that's what I'm consuming now, and as a sucker for like old English, you know.
Classics.
Yeah, like you know, I just picked up another copy, or my friend picked up a copy of Pride and Prejudice for me. That's one of my favorites. But it's like this really cute, like tiny book. He got it in England. I was like, oh, that's really cute.
Ooh.
So I'm reading that next, rereading. But as far as video games, I think Final Fantasy has been a
Definitely,
franchise
yeah.
that set itself apart in terms of just like delivery. You know, just those emotions, those you remember Final Fantasy
do.
game, like you
You
remember, and
do.
that's the question of like what is good writing? Is it monetary? Is it impactful? It's just kind of like what do you want? I want to write to leave an impact on people, and
Yeah.
like that's something I think Final Fantasy in almost all of their games has done very well. So
Well, for video games, I talked about Stray earlier. I haven't been playing games lately, guys. Just
I know, me too. That's why I didn't have anything to say. I'm sorry.
I've been busy.
For books, I haven't read a book since high school. But no, a book that I did read in high school though that like I still remember to this day is very good. It's called The Glass Castle. It's a memoir by Jeanette.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Walls, maybe that's her
Mhm.
name.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's about her journey through like homelessness as a child, and it's very good. I love a metaphor, so like
Me
that
too.
whole book is basically a giant metaphor, and it's very good.
Mm.
For screenwriting, I'm gonna take this time to get you guys to watch Dueling the Phantoms. I'm very interested in like writing that's meant for children specifically, and how it can be elevated to be enjoyed by everyone. Like I think a lot of people think writing for kids has to be very surface level, very tame and calm. I don't think that's true at all, and I think this show does a very good job about dealing with like grief and anxiety and topics like that that kids are affected by, obviously, but maybe haven't seen portrayed in media up until this point. So the show, Kenny Ortega, come on the show, does a very good job at like displaying that in a way that is palatable for kids, and it's just fun, good rewatchable time. It's on Netflix. Watch it. It's only 9 episodes. I need to talk about it more.
93%.
Exactly. It's so good. And the music, oh my god. Anyways, songwriting. Look, one of my favorite artists is SZA, and she's coming out with her sophomore album on Friday.
I can't believe that.
So excited.
SZA makes songs for girls like me.
She really does. I love her writing
her
so much because
second album.
she has like a Taylor Swift kind of vibe where she like writes what she knows and her experiences, but it feels different to me because it feels a bit more. I'm trying to think of the right word that's not like insulting to Taylor Swift. I do like Taylor. I like Taylor. But
more raw,
SZA's writing, it's a bit more vulnerable. I think it's more like personal and like.
Y'all been listening
like,
to the wrong Taylor
powerful.
Swift songs because
Yes.
there are some very vulnerable Taylor Swift
like,
songs.
not to talk
ready.
shit. Not to talk shit about Taylor Swift. I love
I
Taylor.
love SZA too, though.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, her writing, I just love it so much, and especially Control. It's a great a great coming of age album. If you're in your early 20s, listen to Control. It'll hit you where you live. It's so good. So love SZA.
Noted.
I don't know. Do I read? Is the question. Like you said, Final Fantasy. I will sit and watch somebody play a Final Fantasy game, which I don't do too often. But the story is enough to. I'll sit there while they play the whole game, which is kind of crazy. I might need to see. You might need to stream 13 for me.
Oh
I haven't
God!
had a chance to play it yet.
On the PS3. Is that possible?
I don't. We'll make it. We'll make it possible.
I'll use my phone.
Just FaceTime me, right?
Right.
Yeah, Final Fantasy is just so good. Music wise, do I listen to music?
It's like I've never consumed media. Like
Don't do that.
We didn't even talk about. We wanted to have a whole episode on anime, but like anime within itself.
Oh yeah,
has some really good writing as well.
That's what me and Isaiah. Yeah, Japanese writing is like a whole thing within. Even like Japanese like dramas and shows. I don't know if you've seen Alice in Borderland, but like
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's really the writing is really really good.
There's some really good animated writing. Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli writing.
Very good.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah,
when Marnie was there. Sorry.
We don't have any animation writers here, but I think like writing for animation is a different like type of screenwriting than like live action, and it's so impressive. And there's so many great like animated stories out there, and I hate that it's like a genre that is kid centered.
Yeah,
it's really not.
It's really not. I love animation.
Animation's so good.
So good. We need to have an animation episode. Anyways, so
also, sorry, real quick, shout out to K-dramas because it is some of the most like heightened, over the top writing that really just hits you where you live.
Absolutely.
Very captivating.
Yes, watch It's Okay to Not Be Okay on Netflix. It's so good. Every episode I cried, every single one.
I'm gonna put that in my notes.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So watch it. And the lead is very, very attractive.
Okay.
Anyways.
I thought we were
anyways, all right. So, do you have any more things you like writing wise?
No, I mean, no, I didn't come well prepared for this episode.
That's okay. We didn't really prepare for this one.
We did.
Don't tell the people that.
We are unqualified. We don't
what did
prepare.
we say? It's unqualified. We told y'all what y'all were getting into first episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
Qualified to an extent.
Well, thank you so much, Isaiah, for being on here.
Yeah, of course.
We wish you all the best. We know that you're going to be winning awards for your writing.
Oh, I hope so.
Please put us in your acceptance speech.
Shout out to Unqualified.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.